When I asked my son to pay back what he owed me at Thanksgiving dinner, he snapped, "Stop begging for money. It's embarrassing." My other kids nodded in agreement. I just smiled. "You're right, honey." Then I texted my bank, "Cancel all their credit cards." The next morning, he called screaming, "Why you wanna ruin my life?" Before we continue, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. Now let me tell you my story. The scent of roasting turkey and my grandmother's sweet potato pie recipe, heavy on the cinnamon and nutmeg, should have been the smell of happiness. It should have been the warm, comforting blanket that settled over our family every fourth Thursday in November, a fragrant symbol of our blessings. But as I stood at the counter of my cozy suburban Atlanta home, basting the bird for the third time, the familiar aroma felt different. It was a mask, a beautiful, delicious facade, trying to cover the faint, acrid scent of unspoken tensions and simmering resentments. Thanksgiving had always been my day. A day for me, Martha, a 68-year-old retired accountant, to do what I did best, quietly and meticulously provide. I had managed the family's finances both openly and secretly for decades. I had managed their emotional needs, their childhood squabbles, and now, their adult anxieties. And today I was managing this dinner, a carefully orchestrated performance of family harmony. My children were all here, a constellation of my life's work. Jamal, my eldest at 35, was holding court in the living room. He was a vision of performative success, from his perfectly sculpted beard and oversized gold watch to the designer sweater that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. He spoke loudly about his sales commissions and his killer instincts in the market, a charismatic peacock in a room that had long since learned to serve as his stage. Danielle, my only daughter, was 31 and lived her life through the filtered lens of her phone. She was artfully arranged on the armchair, her impeccably styled braids cascading over a cream-colored cashmere top, her face a perfect mask of makeup. She wasn't participating in the conversation, she was documenting it, taking carefully angled photos of the table settings, the crackling fireplace, and her own pensive, curated smiles. She was a silent, beautiful ghost at her own family gathering. And then there was David, my youngest at 28. He sat on the edge of the sofa, a quiet, nervous satellite in Jamal's orbit. He tried to emulate his older brother's flashy style, but on him it looked less like confidence and more like a costume. He watched Jamal with a mixture of awe and apprehension, nodding along, laughing a little too loudly at his jokes. A man forever seeking the approval of a sibling who had never truly offered it. I watched them from the kitchen, my heart filled with a love so deep it was a physical ache, yet tinged with a profound and weary sadness. They were my children, my world, but they had become strangers to me, and to the reality of the life that supported their own. They saw me as mom, a simple, predictable figure, living a quiet life on a modest pension. They had no concept of the woman who had spent 40 years navigating the complex world of corporate finance, the savvy investor who had turned a small inheritance into a formidable fortune. My quiet life was a choice, a peaceful harbor after a long and successful career, but they saw it as a limitation, and they had grown to see me in the same way. Today, however, was going to be different. I had a plan. For months I had been feeling a growing unease, a sense that my quiet support had curdled into a toxic entitlement that was crippling my children, especially Jamal. The numbers didn't lie. I was an accountant after all, and Jamal's numbers were a disaster. Today I was going to gently, lovingly begin the process of cutting the financial cord. It was a conversation I had been dreading, but I knew it was necessary, for all of us. The dinner was a success, at least on the surface. The turkey was moist, the mashed potatoes were creamy, and the conversation flowed with a practiced, superficial ease. We talked about sports, about a new show everyone was watching, about the weather. We talked about everything and nothing. After the last of the pie had been eaten and everyone was leaning back, groaning with a theatrical fullness, I knew it was time. The house was warm, their bellies were full. It was the moment of maximum contentment, the moment I had chosen with an accountant's precision. I cleared my throat, a small quiet sound that nonetheless cut through the drowsy post-dinner chatter. All three of my children turned to look at me, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and impatience, ready for me to offer coffee. "Jamal, honey," I began, my voice as soft and gentle as I could make it. I folded my hands on the table, a picture of maternal calm. I was just looking over my finances this past week, preparing for the end of the year, and I was wondering if we could talk, Maybe sometime next week, about a plan for you to start paying back that personal loan I gave you. The term personal loan was a kindness, a fiction I had created to protect his pride. It wasn't a loan. It was a 3-year, uninterrupted bailout of his disastrous financial decisions. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. The warm, cozy contentment evaporated, replaced by a sudden Arctic chill. David shifted uncomfortably on the sofa. Danielle's phone for the first time all day was forgotten in her lap. Jamal, who had been slouched in his chair, slowly sat up, his handsome face hardening. He stared at me, his eyes wide with a look of pure unadulterated disbelief, as if I had just started speaking in a foreign language. He let the silence stretch, a dramatic theatrical pause designed to amplify the absurdity of my request. "Oh my God, Mom," he finally snapped, his voice a whip crack in the quiet room. He threw his hands up in a gesture of theatrical disgust, pushing his chair back from the table with a loud scrape. "Are you serious? Right now? At Thanksgiving dinner?" I didn't flinch. "I just thought it was time we started a conversation, sweetheart. It's been a few years." "A conversation?" he said, his voice rising, gaining a cruel mocking edge. He looked around at his siblings, a silent appeal for them to witness this outrage. "You want to talk about money? Now, you're going to sit here, after this beautiful meal that we all came here to enjoy with you, and you're going to start begging for money?" The word begging was a slap in the face. It was a deliberate, calculated cruelty designed to shame me, to put me back in my place as the grateful dependent mother. "Jamal, that's not what I'm doing," I said, my voice still quiet, though it took every ounce of my self-control to keep it from trembling. "That's exactly what you're doing," he shot back, his voice now a full-blown declaration of war. He stood up, towering over the table. "Stop it. Just stop begging for money. It's embarrassing." My gaze flickered to my other children. I was looking for an ally, a voice of reason, a flicker of decency. I found none. Danielle, my beautiful image-obsessed daughter, looked horrified, not at her brother's cruelty, but at the sheer social awkwardness of the scene. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, a silent signal of her allegiance with Jamal. It was embarrassing. Mother was making a scene. I looked at David, my sweet, quiet David. He was staring at his plate, his face flushed with a deep, painful shame. He wouldn't meet my eyes, but when Jamal looked at him for support, he too gave a slight, jerky nod of agreement. His silence was his consent. His loyalty, like it always had, lay with the brother he feared, not the mother he supposedly loved. The betrayal was absolute. It was a united front. In that moment, I was not their mother. I was a creditor, an inconvenience, a source of profound and public embarrassment. The pain was a sharp physical thing, a knife twisting in my chest. For a split second I thought I might break. The tears were right there, burning behind my eyes. But then something else took over. It was the quiet, methodical accountant. It was the woman who had faced down condescending male executives and hostile boards of directors for 40 years. It was the part of me that did not deal in messy emotions, but in cold, hard numbers and logical consequences. The pain was still there, but I walled it off, filed it away. I looked up at my son, at his furious, self-righteous face, and I smiled. It was a calm, serene, and utterly unreadable smile. "You're right, honey," I said, my voice a soft, gentle murmur. "My apologies. This was neither the time nor the place." My capitulation was so swift, so complete, that it disarmed him. He stared at me, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. He had been expecting a fight, tears, a dramatic scene. My quiet, smiling agreement was not in his script. He had won, but the victory felt strangely hollow. "Yeah, well," he mumbled, sitting back down, his anger deflating into a sullen, resentful silence. The rest of the family, following his lead, began to breathe again. The crisis was over. Mom had been put in her place. And under the table, hidden by the festive tablecloth, I picked up my phone. My fingers were perfectly steady. I opened my messaging app to a conversation with my private banker. The message was already written. I had composed it that morning, hoping I would never have to send it, but knowing in my heart of hearts that I probably would. The message was 2 words. Code Nightingale. I pressed send. A small checkmark appeared beside the message. Delivered. Across the table my children began to talk again, their voices a little too loud, a little too cheerful, trying to paper over the ugly crack that had just appeared in the foundation of our family. They had no idea that the foundation itself had just been vaporized by 2 quiet words sent from the phone of the embarrassing old woman they thought they had just silenced. The smile on my face was serene, but it was not one of defeat. It was the quiet, patient smile of an accountant who has just balanced the books. And the final brutal accounting for my children had just begun. The secret to my quiet, comfortable retirement wasn't a secret at all. It was just a truth my children had never bothered to investigate. They saw my modest, paid-off house in a quiet Atlanta suburb, my sensible 10-year-old sedan, and my simple, unflashy lifestyle, and they drew the conclusions they wanted to draw. They saw a woman living on a fixed income, a mother who had likely scrimped and saved her whole life and now needed their consideration, if not their support. The reality was something they couldn't begin to fathom. I had retired not as a simple bookkeeper but as a senior partner at one of Atlanta's most respected accounting firms. My specialty had been in the nascent explosive world of tech startups in the late 90s. I had a knack for spotting potential, for seeing the solid financial bones beneath a flashy, chaotic exterior. And I hadn't just advised my clients. I had invested in them, small strategic investments, often taken in lieu of a full fee. Most of them had fizzled out, as startups do, but 2 of them had not. 2 of them had been acquired by Microsoft in the early 2000s for sums that had made headlines. My children had been young then, their lives a whirlwind of soccer practice and school plays. They had no idea that their mother, in her sensible suits and practical shoes, had just become a multi-millionaire. My husband and I had made a conscious decision not to. We had seen too many friends' children ruined by inherited wealth, their ambition and drive leached away by the poison of expectation. We wanted our children to build their own lives, to find their own way, but we had, perhaps, made them too comfortable. We had provided a safety net and they had mistaken it for a hammock. After my husband passed and I was on my own, that safety net had become a tool of quiet manipulation. It had started with Jamal. He'd graduated with a business degree and a mountain of student loans, and had immediately adopted the lifestyle of a man who was already a CEO. The flashy car, the designer clothes, the expensive nights out, it was all a performance, an attempt to project the success he felt he was owed. 3 years ago, he had come to me in a panic. He was in deep, real trouble. He had maxed out multiple credit cards, taken out high-interest personal loans, and was on the verge of financial collapse. He was terrified and ashamed. And my mother's heart, foolish and tender, had gone out to him. I hadn't just given him a loan. I knew he would squander it. I had done something I thought was more responsible. I had him approved for a supplementary credit card, an emergency card, linked to a private wealth account I maintained with a discreet, exclusive bank downtown. My name was on the primary account. His was on the supplementary card. This is for emergencies only, Jamal, I had told him, my voice firm. And for consolidating your existing debt, we will set up a payment plan and you will pay me back with interest. The payment plan had never materialized. The emergency card had quickly become his primary source of income. It was a magic piece of plastic that never ever said no. He used it for everything, from his rent and car payments to $1,000 sneakers and extravagant vacations. He lived the life of a wealthy man, all while telling his friends and siblings that he was killing it in sales. He was killing it all right. He was killing my savings account. The debt had ballooned to over $30,000. My gentle reminders about our payment plan were met with dismissive waves and vague promises of a huge bonus that was always just around the corner. And I had let him. I had enabled him. Because it was easier than confrontation, because I loved him, and because a part of me felt a deep nagging guilt that my own secret wealth had somehow created this monster of entitlement. Danielle and David had similar, though smaller, arrangements. An emergency gas and grocery card for Danielle, which she used for boutique clothing and expensive makeup palettes. A small line of credit for David, which he used to try and keep up with his brother's lifestyle. It was a secret shadow economy within our family. A system of subsidies that allowed them to maintain their carefully curated lives, all while seeing their mother as a woman who probably clipped coupons. Code Nightingale was the kill switch. It was a protocol I had established with my private banker Chloe, a sharp, fiercely intelligent young woman who had taken over my account a few years ago. She had seen the statements, she knew exactly what was going on. "You just tell me when, Martha," she had told me at our last quarterly review, her eyes full of a quiet, professional sympathy. "You say the word and we shut it all down." The word had been said. As I sat at my Thanksgiving table smiling my serene empty smile, I knew that somewhere in a secure downtown server, a series of digital commands were being executed. Jamal's magic card, Danielle's shopping pass, David's line of credit. They were all being turned into useless pieces of plastic. The invisible silent river of my money that had flowed into their lives for years had just been dammed. They didn't know it yet. They were fat and happy on their Thanksgiving feast, completely unaware that a great and terrible financial drought was about to begin. A few minutes after I sent the text, my phone vibrated silently in my lap. It was a message from Chloe. Code Nightingale confirmed. All supplementary cards have been deactivated. Account access is now restricted to the primary holder only. I've been waiting for this day, Martha. Enjoy your pie. A small, genuine smile touched my lips. I looked up at my children. They were laughing now, the awkwardness of my begging already forgotten, relegated to another instance of mom being weird. Jamal was telling a loud, boastful story about a deal he had supposedly closed. He was the king of his imaginary castle, a ruler whose entire kingdom was about to be repossessed. And for the first time in a long time I felt a flicker of something that wasn't sadness or guilt. It felt like peace, the quiet, clean peace of a problem that has finally been solved. The weekend after Thanksgiving is a blur of consumerist frenzy, a national holiday of its own. It's a time for Black Friday doorbusters, for frantic online shopping, for the laying of the financial groundwork for the Christmas season. For my children, it had always been their Super Bowl. It was a time to leverage the magic plastic in their wallets to its absolute maximum, acquiring things they didn't need with money they didn't have. This year, however, was going to be different. I had cancelled the magic show. I knew the first domino to fall would be Jamal. His entire identity was built on a scaffolding of conspicuous consumption. Without the ability to spend, his very sense of self would begin to crumble. The ticking time bomb that would trigger his collapse was something he had been insufferably proud of, something he had lorded over his siblings for weeks. He had, in a grand gesture of supposed generosity and success, booked a massive, non-refundable New Year's ski trip to Aspen for the entire family, himself, his siblings and their respective partners. He had painted a picture of a week of snowy, alpine luxury, a sprawling chalet, private ski lessons, champagne-fueled nights in front of a roaring fire. It was the ultimate performance of the successful scion, the benevolent patriarch in training. He had, of course, paid the substantial initial deposit on the now-defunct credit card. The much larger final balance, a 5-figure sum that would have given a normal person a panic attack, was due to be automatically charged that very next morning. Friday, he had been bragging about it at dinner. "It's my last big splurge before my huge year-end bonus hits," he had announced, winking at his girlfriend, a pretty but vacant young woman, who looked at him with the wide, adoring eyes of someone who believed every word he said. Gotta end the year with a bang, you know? His life was about to end with a bang, but not the kind he was anticipating. I spent Friday in a state of quiet, calm anticipation. I cleaned my house, clearing away the remnants of the Thanksgiving feast. I took a long walk in the crisp autumn air. I felt lighter than I had in years, as if a great, unspoken weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The constant, low-grade hum of anxiety about my children's finances, a hum that had been the background noise of my life for years, was finally silent. I knew what was coming. I knew my phone would ring. I knew there would be screaming, accusations, a firestorm of indignant rage. I was not afraid. I was ready. But the first call I received was not the one I was expecting. It came late that evening, long after I had settled in with a book and a cup of tea. It was David. His voice was quiet, tentative, laced with a deep, painful shame. "Mom?" he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, my own voice gentle. There was a long pause. I could hear him take a deep, shuddering breath. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry," he stammered. "About dinner, what Jamal said, and how we just sat there. It wasn't right. I'm sorry." The apology was a small, fragile thing, but it was genuine. It was the first crack in the wall of their united, entitled front. "Thank you for saying that, David," I said, and I meant it. "That means a lot to me. I feel terrible," he continued, the words tumbling out now. "It's just, Jamal gets like that, you know? And everyone just goes along with it. And I know it's not an excuse, but—" "I know," I said, cutting him off gently, saving him from having to articulate the painful truth of his own weakness. "Don't you worry about a thing, David," I told him, My voice calm and reassuring, almost prophetic. Everything is being taken care of. He didn't know what I meant. He couldn't. He just heard a mother's comforting words. He mumbled a quiet good night and hung up. But I knew that small act of contrition, that one moment of genuine remorse had set him apart. The storm was coming for all of them, but David at least had thought to bring an umbrella. The next morning, I was in my garden, my hands buried in the cool, rich soil when the real storm finally broke. The phone rang and the caller ID flashed with Jamal's name. I wiped my hands on my apron, took a deep, calming breath and answered. I didn't even have a chance to say hello. What did you do? The voice that erupted from the phone was a raw, guttural scream of pure, unadulterated rage. It was so loud I had to pull the receiver away from my ear. I waited for the initial incoherent wave of fury to pass. I could hear him panting on the other end of the line, his breath coming in ragged, furious gasps. Good morning, Jamal, I said, my voice a placid lake of calm against his hurricane of rage. Is something the matter? Is something the matter? He shrieked, his voice cracking with disbelief. Is something the matter? My cards are all declined. I just tried to buy brunch for Tiffany, and my card was declined. In front of everyone, I looked like a fool. Then I tried another one. Declined. What did you do? Brunch. Of course. The public performance of his wealth was the first casualty. I could picture the scene perfectly, the trendy, overpriced restaurant, the showy ordering of champagne, and then the final humiliating moment of the declined card. It was a wound to his ego so profound it was almost a physical injury. Are you trying to ruin my life? He screamed, the question a raw, desperate accusation. Is this because of Thanksgiving? Is this your pathetic little revenge? I sighed, a soft, weary sound. I looked at the beautiful late-blooming mums in my garden, their vibrant colors a stark contrast to the ugly monochrome rage coming through the phone. Jamal, I said, my voice still quiet, still calm. I'm not trying to ruin your life. On the contrary, I'm giving you exactly what you asked for. What are you talking about? He spat. At Thanksgiving dinner, I explained patiently, as if to a small child, you were very clear. You told me to stop asking you for money. You said it was embarrassing, and you were right. It was embarrassing. It was embarrassing for me to have to constantly subsidize the life of my 35-year-old son. It was embarrassing to have to enable your financial irresponsibility. So, I have stopped. There was a stunned silence on his end. He had been expecting a fight, a denial, an argument. He was not prepared for calm, irrefutable logic. The credit card you were using, Jamal, I continued, my voice gentle but with an underlying edge of steel, the one that has paid for your apartment, your car, and your $1,000 sneakers for the past 3 years, is not your credit card. It is my credit card. It is linked to my bank account. It is my money. I let that sink in. Since you made it so abundantly clear that you do not want me asking you for the money you owe me, I said, delivering the final devastating blow, I have simply taken care of the problem myself. I have removed my money from the equation. The debt you racked up is no longer your concern. I will absorb it. It is my problem now. I paused, letting him feel the full terrifying weight of what was coming next. You're free, Jamal, I said, my voice a soft, chilling whisper. You are finally completely financially independent from your embarrassing old mother. Congratulations. The financial plague, as I had known it would, spread quickly. The quiet, orderly world my children had built on the invisible foundation of my wealth began to crumble, not with a bang but with a series of small, humiliating pops. Later that same Saturday, Danielle called. She was in tears. Not the quiet, heartbroken tears of her brother David, but the loud, frustrated, angry tears of a princess who has just been informed her royal allowance has been cut off. Mom, something is wrong with my card, she wailed, her voice a high-pitched symphony of distress. I was trying to buy this gorgeous ski jacket online. It was 50% off and it just kept saying payment method declined. I tried 3 times. It's so embarrassing, the website probably thinks I'm some kind of fraud. The irony of her statement was so thick I could have cut it with a knife. I'm sure it's just a glitch in the system, dear, I said, my voice a soothing, non-committal balm. It's not a glitch, she insisted, because then I tried to order my groceries for the week, and that was declined too. I had to use my debit card, Mom, my actual money. Can you call the bank and fix it? I don't think there's anything to fix, Danielle, I said gently. That card was always meant for emergencies, for gas and groceries. Perhaps you've just reached your limit for the month. Limit? She scoffed. The concept as foreign to her as quantum physics. It's never had a limit before. Well, I said with a sigh, I suppose all good things must come to an end. Then, it was David's turn. He didn't call, he texted. It was a single panicked message that spoke volumes. Mom, my gas card was declined at the pump. Had to leave my car there. Is everything okay? The image of my youngest son, stranded at a gas station because he couldn't afford to put $20 worth of fuel in his car, should have broken my heart. And a small part of it did. But the larger part, the part that had been activated on Thanksgiving night, felt a grim sense of satisfaction. The anesthesia had worn off. For the first time in their adult lives, my children were beginning to feel the real, unsubsidized pain of their own financial choices. The stark, cold reality of their complete and utter dependence on their broke mother was hitting them with the force of a physical blow. Their lifestyles, their social standing, their very sense of self, it was all a sham, a carefully constructed illusion funded by the quiet, steady drip of my embarrassing money. I had turned off the tap and their worlds were drying up with terrifying speed. The real crisis, I knew, was still to come. The Aspen trip, the 5-figure time bomb that was set to detonate at any moment. Late that night, Jamal called an emergency sibling meeting. I knew this because David, in a quiet act of newfound loyalty, texted me to let me know. Jamal called, we're all going to his apartment. He's freaking out about the Aspen trip. He said not to tell you. Thank you for letting me know, sweetheart. I had texted back. You just stay calm. This has nothing to do with you. I pictured the scene at Jamal's stylish, overpriced apartment. An apartment I was paying the rent on. The three of them gathered under the track lighting, their faces a mixture of panic and fury. Jamal, the deposed king, trying to rally his terrified subjects into a united front, a rebellion against the matriarch who had so suddenly and completely cut off their supply lines. He would be pacing, running his hands through his hair, his voice a mixture of bluster and desperation. He would be trying to frame my actions as a betrayal, an act of petty vindictive cruelty. He would be trying to spin a narrative in which they were the victims, and I was the villain. But this time, I knew, his army was no longer united. David, the quiet foot soldier, was beginning to question the cause. And their enemy, the woman they thought was a weak and easily defeated ruler, had an arsenal they couldn't even begin to imagine. As they plotted their futile rebellion, I sat in my quiet, peaceful home, drafting an email. It was time for the final devastating revelation. It was time to show them the full, unredacted accounting of their own entitlement. The alliance, which had seemed so solid and impenetrable at my Thanksgiving table, began to crumble under the weight of financial reality. The emergency sibling meeting at Jamal's apartment did not go as he had planned. David called me the next morning, his voice quiet and shaken. He recounted the scene for me. Jamal had been in full-blown panic mode, his usual arrogant bluster replaced by a wild, desperate energy. The email had arrived. The final 5-figure payment for the Aspen trip had failed. The booking, along with his substantial non-refundable deposit, would be forfeited if the full balance was not paid within 24 hours. It's a catastrophe. Jamal had apparently declared, pacing his living room like a caged animal. This is going to ruin me. We have to do something. His plan was simple. They would go to my house as a united front. They would confront me, all three of them, and demand that I turn their money back on. He was convinced that faced with the combined force of all her children, their loving mother would cave. He believed my actions were a temporary emotional outburst, a senior moment that could be corrected with enough pressure. He wanted us to guilt you, David told me, his voice thick with a shame so profound I could feel it through the phone. He said, we should talk about how Dad would have wanted us to be taken care of, how you're not thinking clearly. And what did you say, David? I asked, my voice gentle. There was a pause. I said no. He whispered. The two words were a quiet revolution. I told him he was the one who embarrassed you. I told him you had every right to do what you did. I told him what you told me, that everything was being taken care of. And then I said, he took a deep, shuddering breath. I said, she's right, Jamal. It's her money. The fallout, David explained, had been immediate and ugly. Jamal had exploded in a torrent of rage, calling him a traitor, a coward, a mama's boy. Danielle, ever the loyal lieutenant, had sided with Jamal, her face a mask of cold, dismissive fury. She had told David he was being selfish, that he was going to ruin the trip for everyone. The sibling power structure, A hierarchy that had been in place since childhood with Jamal at its apex, had shattered. David, by speaking a simple quiet truth, had abdicated his role as the compliant younger brother. He had chosen a different side. My side. He had left the meeting, the sound of his brother's furious shouts following him out the door. After I hung up with David, I knew it was time. Their alliance was broken. They were scattered, confused, and at their most vulnerable. It was the perfect moment to deploy my final weapon. I put the finishing touches on the email I had been drafting. The subject line was simple, direct and utterly chilling. My financial records. The body of the email was just one sentence. I believe this belongs to you. Below the text was a single, password-protected PDF attachment. I sent the email to all three of them simultaneously. A moment later, Jamal called back, his voice a low, suspicious growl. "What is this, Mom? Some kind of virus?" "No, dear," I said calmly. "It's a document. I thought you all might be interested in a clearer picture of your own financial histories. The password is entitlement." I hung up before he could respond. I imagined the three of them in their separate homes staring at their screens. I imagined the moment of dawning horror as they typed in the password, a word that was both an insult and a perfect damning diagnosis of their collective disease. The document that opened was not a virus. It was something far more destructive. It was a meticulously detailed, multi-year spreadsheet, a work of pure cold accounting art. I had spent the last 2 days compiling it, pulling data from years of credit card statements. It was a complete and total record of their dependency. The spreadsheet was broken down into 3 sections, one for each of them. Under each name was a chronological, itemized list of every single purchase they had made on my accounts for the past 3 years. Every overpriced coffee, every designer handbag, every impulsive online purchase, every fancy dinner, every vacation I had never been invited on. Next to each purchase was the date, the vendor, and the exact amount. The columns were perfectly aligned, the numbers precise to the last cent. It was a forensic accounting of their lives. A secret history they had believed was untraceable. I had included everything, from the mundane Danielle's weekly $200 grocery bills that were mysteriously devoid of actual groceries, to the absurd Jamal's $1,800 purchase at a Louis Vuitton store, labeled on the statement as hardware supplies. At the bottom of each of their sections I had created a final damning summary. The total amount of their spending was listed in a large, bold, red font. Jamal's total was $31,428.17. Danielle's was just over $19,000. David's, to his credit, was a more modest $8,500. It was not an accusation, it was not an emotional plea, it was just data. Cold, hard, and undeniable. It was the receipt for their lifestyle, a bill they had never known they were accumulating. It was the irrefutable mathematical proof of the very entitlement they had just been forced to type into their keyboards. It was a mirror, and for the first time, they were being forced to look at their true, unfiltered reflections. The 2 days that followed the sending of the spreadsheet were a symphony of silence. The frantic, angry phone calls ceased. The accusatory texts stopped. It was as if a great, noisy storm had finally blown itself out, leaving behind a quiet, unnerving calm. I knew they were talking to each other, their frantic, panicked conversations now taking place in a world from which I was completely excluded. But I also knew the dynamic had irrevocably shifted. The spreadsheet was not something they could argue with, not something they could dismiss as a mother's emotional outburst. It was a fact, as solid and immovable as a mountain. They were no longer victims of my sudden cruelty. They were the documented perpetrators of their own quiet, long-running fraud. I spent those 2 days in a state of profound peace. I worked in my garden, my hands in the soil, feeling the simple, honest connection to the earth. I read, I listened to music, I began the quiet, necessary work of reclaiming my own home, my own life, from the emotional ghosts of my children's expectations. The anger was gone, replaced by a kind of weary, detached sadness. I had done what I had to do, the consequences were now their burden to bear, not mine. Late on Sunday afternoon, as I was sitting in my favorite armchair reading a book, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from David. My heart gave a small, hopeful flutter. The message was short, but it contained a universe of meaning. "Mom, I am so sorry for everything. I'd like to see you, just to talk. I want to start paying you back. I can make coffee." The last sentence was what broke me. I can make coffee. It was such a small thing, Such a simple domestic offer. It wasn't a grand promise or a dramatic declaration. It was a quiet, humble gesture of service. It was the first time in his adult life that David had offered to provide something for me, rather than the other way around. It was the beginning of a shift, the first tentative step away from the toxic wasteland of his entitlement and toward the solid ground of genuine reciprocal love. I looked at the message, and a single tear, the first one I had allowed myself to shed since that awful Thanksgiving dinner, rolled down my cheek. It was not a tear of sadness or of anger, it was a tear of hope. Jamal and Danielle were lost to me, at least for now. They were trapped in the wreckage of their own arrogance, and it would be a long, painful journey for them to find their way out. If they ever did. But David was trying. He was taking the first step. I smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached my eyes and filled my heart. I wiped the tear from my cheek and began to type my reply. I would love that, sweetheart. My house. Tomorrow at 10, I'll bring the pie. Thank you for watching.